When my stepmother handed my elderly father that forged letter claiming I had lost my mind, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the doorway of his nursing home room, watching him read it with shaking hands, his eyes confused and scared. He looked up at me like I was a stranger. That moment, that single terrible moment, broke something in me that I didn't even know could break. But here's the thing about betrayal. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, wearing a smile, holding your hand, calling you sweetheart. And by the time you realize what's happening, the damage is already done. My name is Caroline, and this is the story of how I lost my father before he actually died, and how a piece of paper I signed years ago became the only weapon I had left. I need to take you back a bit. Not too far, just enough so you understand how we got here. My father, Robert, was a good man. Not perfect, never perfect, but good. He raised me alone after my mother died when I was 7. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. One day she was packing my lunch, the next day she was gone. Dad did his best. He worked double shifts at the plant, learned to braid my hair even though his thick fingers fumbled with the rubber bands, showed up to every school play even when he was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. We were a team, him and me. That's what he always said. Team Roberts. It was corny, but I loved it. I loved him. He stayed single for a long time. 18 years to be exact. I went off to college, got my degree in accounting, came back to town, got a job at a small firm. Dad was 59 by then, starting to think about retirement, starting to look a little lonely in that house where he'd raised me. I encouraged him to get out more, maybe join a club, meet people. That's when he met Sandra. She was 52, blonde, bubbly, always laughing at his jokes. She worked at the grocery store, and apparently they'd been chatting for months before he finally asked her to coffee. He called me that night, nervous as a teenager. Caroline, he said, I think I might have a date. Is that okay? Is that weird? I told him it was wonderful. I meant it. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted him to have someone to share his life with, someone to watch old movies with on Sunday afternoons, someone to hold his hand. He deserved that. They dated for 6 months before he proposed. It was fast, sure, but they were older. They knew what they wanted. Or at least I thought they did. Sandra seemed sweet. A little chatty, a little intense about certain things, but overall harmless. She had 2 grown kids from a previous marriage who lived out of state. He said they were supportive. She said she'd always wanted a quiet life with a good man. The wedding was small. Just us, a few of Dad's friends from work, Sandra's sister. It was at the courthouse, nothing fancy. Sandra wore a cream dress and carried daisies. Dad couldn't stop smiling. I stood next to him as his best man because that's what he wanted, and I felt this warm glow in my chest. My dad was happy. Finally, after all these years, he was happy. They moved into his house, the house I grew up in. Sandra brought her things, redecorated a bit. Dad didn't mind. He joked that the place needed a woman's touch. I visited every Sunday for dinner, just like always. Sandra cooked big heavy meals that Dad loved. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. She'd fuss over him, make sure he took his vitamins, nag him gently about his cholesterol. It seemed perfect. For about a year it was perfect. Then little things started changing. Small things. Things I didn't pay enough attention to at first. Dad stopped calling me during the week. We used to talk every Wednesday night, just a quick check-in, how's work, how's life, love you, bye. But the calls stopped. When I asked him about it, he said, oh, Sandra and I are usually watching our show on Wednesdays now. I didn't think much of it. Married people have routines. Then the Sunday dinners started getting cancelled. Sandra would call, always very apologetic, saying Dad wasn't feeling well, or they had other plans, or she had a headache. It went from every week to every other week to once a month. I tried to visit unannounced once, just dropped by on a Saturday afternoon. Sandra answered the door and seemed surprised, almost annoyed. She didn't invite me in right away. She stood in the doorway and said, oh, Caroline, we weren't expecting you. Your father's napping. Maybe call first next time. I should have seen it then. I should have known. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Sandra was his wife. She was taking care of him. Maybe I was just jealous, struggling to share him after having him to myself for so long. I backed off. I gave them space. That was my first mistake. Dad turned 72. I planned a birthday dinner at his favorite restaurant. I called Sandra to coordinate. She said, that's so sweet, honey, but we're actually having a quiet celebration at home, just the 2 of us. I felt a sting, but I didn't push. I sent a gift card and a card in the mail. Dad called to thank me, but the conversation was short. He sounded distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, "Of course, sweetheart, everything's fine. Sandra's taking real good care of me." 3 months later, I got a call from Dad's doctor's office. There had been a missed appointment and they were calling to reschedule. I was confused. I asked what appointment. The receptionist hesitated, then said the follow-up for his heart medication adjustment. I didn't even know he was on heart medication. When I called Dad to ask, Sandra answered his phone. She said, "Oh, didn't he tell you? He had a little scare a few months ago, nothing serious, just high blood pressure. The doctor put him on some pills. He's fine now." I asked to speak to him. She said he was in the bathroom, she'd have him call me back. He didn't call back. I started feeling uneasy. It was this creeping sensation like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried calling more often. Sandra usually answered. She was always polite, always pleasant, but she had this way of making me feel like I was bothering them. "Oh, Caroline, he's resting." "Oh, Caroline, we're about to head out." "Oh, Caroline, can he call you later?" He never called later. Then came the issue with the finances. Dad had always been careful with money. Not cheap, just sensible. He had his pension, his savings, the house paid off. He told me years ago that when he passed, everything would go to me. Not because he didn't trust me to share, but because I was his only child, his only family. It made sense. But about a year and a half into the marriage, he called me out of the blue. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He sounded off, sort of flat. "Caroline," he said, "I need to talk to you about something. Sandra and I have been discussing our finances, and we think it makes sense for her to have access to my accounts. You know, in case something happens to me. She'll need to be able to pay bills and things." I felt my stomach drop. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Dad," I said, "that makes sense, but have you thought about setting up a joint account for household expenses, and keeping your retirement and savings separate? Just to keep things simple?" There was a pause. Then I heard Sandra's voice in the background, muffled. Dad came back on and said, "Well, Sandra thinks it's easier if she's just on everything. That way there's no confusion. It's what married people do, Caroline." I felt like I was losing him. Not to death, but to something worse. To someone else's control. I suggested he talk to a lawyer, maybe set up a trust or something more formal. He got defensive. "Why are you making this complicated? Sandra's my wife. I trust her." "Don't you trust her?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to accuse her of anything. I had no proof, just a gut feeling. So I backed down. I said, "Of course I trust her, Dad. Do whatever makes you comfortable." But I couldn't let it go. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I decided to visit unannounced again. It was a Sunday morning. I drove over with a box of donuts, his favorite kind. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed the lawn was overgrown. Dad always kept the lawn perfect, trimmed every Saturday like clockwork. The flower beds my mother had planted were full of weeds. Sandra answered the door. She was in her bathrobe, her hair messy. She did not look happy to see me. "Caroline," she said, "this really isn't a good time." I smiled, trying to stay pleasant. "I just wanted to drop these off for Dad." "Is he awake?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. Come in. But he's having a rough morning." I stepped inside. The house smelled stale, like old coffee and something else I couldn't place. The living room was cluttered, newspapers and magazines everywhere. The kitchen sink was full of dishes. This wasn't like Dad. He was tidy, organized. He hated mess. I found him in his recliner, staring at the television. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Dad," I said softly. "I brought donuts." He turned slowly. His eyes took a moment to focus. "Caroline," he said, and he smiled, but it was vague, distant. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you. Are you feeling okay?" He nodded. "I'm fine. Just tired." Sandra appeared behind me. "He's been tired a lot lately. The doctor says it's normal for his age." I looked at her. "What doctor?" "His regular doctor. He's been in a few times. Just checkups." I turned back to Dad. "Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" He looked confused. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't fuss." We sat for a little while. I tried to talk to him, but he seemed foggy, like he was only half there. He kept losing track of the conversation, repeating himself. Sandra hovered nearby, watching. I felt like I was being supervised. When I left, I sat in my car for a long time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Something was very, very wrong. I called his doctor's office the next day. I explained I was his daughter and I was concerned. The receptionist said they couldn't give me any information without his consent. I asked if I could at least confirm he'd been in recently. She checked and said yes, he'd been in twice in the last month. I asked what for. She said she couldn't tell me that. I felt helpless. I thought about calling Adult Protective Services, but what would I say? My dad seems tired and his house is messy. That wasn't enough. I needed proof. So I decided to be proactive. I went to see a lawyer. I explained the situation, that I was worried about my father's well-being and his finances, that his new wife seemed to be isolating him. The lawyer listened carefully. She asked if Dad had any legal documents in place. I said I didn't think so. She suggested I talk to Dad about setting up a durable power of attorney and a healthcare directive, naming me as his agent. That way, if something happened and he couldn't make decisions for himself, I'd be able to step in. It was a safety net. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Sandra wouldn't like it. But I had to try. I called Dad and asked if I could take him to lunch, just the two of us. He said sure, that sounds nice. When I picked him up, Sandra came out to the car with him. She was all smiles. You two have fun. Don't keep him out too long, Robert, you know you get tired. We went to a little diner he loved. He seemed more like himself that day, more alert. We talked about old times, about when I was a kid, about Mom. He got a little teary when he talked about her. I miss her, Caroline. Every day. I know, Dad. Me too. Then I brought it up gently. Dad, I've been thinking. You're getting older and I want to make sure you're protected. Have you ever thought about setting up a power of attorney? You know, just in case. He frowned. What do you mean, just in case? I mean, if you ever got sick or couldn't make decisions for yourself, someone you trust would be able to help. Handle your finances, talk to doctors, that kind of thing. He was quiet for a moment. Sandra handles all that now. I know. But legally, if something happened, she might not be able to access everything right away. Can get complicated. A power of attorney just makes it easier. You can name both of us if you want. He looked uncomfortable. I don't know, Caroline. Sandra might not like that. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. He was afraid of upsetting her. I reached across the table and took his hand. Dad, this is about protecting you. It's a smart thing to do. Please just think about it. He nodded slowly. I'll think about it. 2 weeks later he called me. He said he'd talked to Sandra and she agreed it was a good idea. He wanted to set up the documents. I was shocked but relieved. I set up an appointment with my lawyer. The day of the appointment I picked Dad up. Sandra waved from the porch, cheerful as ever. The lawyer explained everything carefully. Dad would sign a durable power of attorney naming me as his agent, effective immediately. He'd also sign a healthcare directive naming me as his healthcare proxy. He listened, asked a few questions, then signed. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had a safeguard now. Things went south, I could protect him. I had no idea how soon I'd need it. For a few months things were quiet. I checked in regularly. Dad seemed stable. Sandra was still controlling, still hovering, but at least I had those documents tucked away in my safe. Then out of nowhere I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman's voice said, "Is this Caroline Roberts?" "Yes." "This is Brenda, the director at Sunrise Meadows Care Facility. Your father, Robert, was admitted here 3 days ago." My heart stopped. What happened? The woman hesitated. His wife brought him in. She said he was becoming confused and aggressive, and she couldn't care for him at home anymore. I felt like I'd been punched. Confused and aggressive? That didn't sound like my dad at all. I told her I'd be there in 20 minutes. I drove like a maniac. Sunrise Meadows was a nursing home on the edge of town, the kind of place people went when they had nowhere else to go. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. I couldn't believe Sandra had put him there without telling me. When I arrived, Brenda met me in the lobby. She was a tired-looking woman in scrubs. She explained that Sandra had filled out all the paperwork, claimed full authority as his spouse. I told her I had power of attorney. She looked surprised. She said Sandra hadn't mentioned that. I want to see him. She led me down a long hallway that smelled like disinfectant and old age. Dad was in a shared room, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. He looked thin, so much thinner than the last time I'd seen him. His hair was greasy. His eyes were dull. "Dad," I said, sitting down next to him. "It's me. Caroline." He turned his head slowly. His eyes didn't quite focus. "Caroline, is Dad? I'm here. What happened? Why are you here?" He blinked. "I don't know. Sandra said I needed to be here. She said I wasn't safe at home." "Not safe? What does that mean?" He shook his head, confused. I don't remember. I get confused sometimes. I felt tears burning my eyes. I held his hand. It's going to be okay. I'm going to figure this out. I went back to Brenda's office. I asked to see his medical records, his intake forms, everything. She hesitated, then said she'd need to check with her supervisor. I told her I had legal authority and if she didn't cooperate I'd bring a lawyer. She made a phone call and 20 minutes later, I had a stack of papers in front of me. The intake form was filled out by Sandra. She'd claimed Dad had dementia, that he was a danger to himself, that he'd tried to leave the house multiple times and gotten lost. None of it was true. There was no medical diagnosis of dementia. No doctor's notes. Just Sandra's word. I felt rage boiling in my chest. She'd lied. She'd put him in a home based on lies. I asked Brenda if Sandra had visited since dropping him off. He checked the log. No. She hadn't been back once. I spent the rest of the day with Dad. I helped him eat dinner, combed his hair, talked to him about anything and everything. He perked up a little, seemed more himself. I told him I was going to get him out of there. He just nodded, trusting me like he always had. That night I called Sandra. She answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. Caroline. What is it? I kept my voice calm. Why is my father in a nursing home? She sighed. Because I can't take care of him anymore, Caroline. He's not well. He needs professional help. He doesn't have dementia, Sandra. There's no diagnosis. You lied on the intake forms. There was a pause. I didn't lie. He's confused. He forgets things. I did what was best for him. Without telling me. Without asking me. You're not his wife, Caroline. I am. I make the decisions. Actually, I said, my voice hard now, I have durable power of attorney. I make the decisions. Silence. Then coldly, we'll see about that. She hung up. The next morning I contacted my lawyer. I explained everything. She advised me to file for guardianship if Sandra contested the power of attorney. Could get messy, but we had the legal documents. We had a good chance. I went back to the nursing home. I told Brenda I was taking Dad home with me. She looked nervous. She said Sandra was listed as the primary contact and had signed the admission papers. I showed her the power of attorney. She said she'd need to consult with the facility's legal team. This was turning into a nightmare. While I waited, I sat with Dad. I asked him questions, trying to assess his mental state. He was forgetful, sure, but not delusional. Not aggressive. He was just old and tired and sad. That afternoon, Sandra showed up. She walked into Dad's room like she owned the place. She didn't even look at me. Robert, she said brightly, how are you feeling today? Dad looked at her and something flickered in his eyes. Something like fear. Okay. She sat down on the other side of the bed. I brought you some things. Your favorite cookies. She pulled out a tin from her bag. Then she finally looked at me. Caroline. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm his daughter, Sandra. Where else would I be? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. You've always been so devoted. There was an edge to her voice. I didn't take the bait. I just stared at her. He turned back to Dad. Robert, sweetheart, I need you to understand something. Caroline has been saying some things. Confusing things. She's trying to make decisions about your care, but that's my job. I'm your wife. Dad looked between us, lost. I stood up. Sandra, can I talk to you outside? She followed me into the hallway. I turned to face her, keeping my voice low. I have power of attorney. I have the legal right to make decisions for him. If you fight me on this, I will take you to court. She laughed. It was a cold sound. You think a piece of paper gives you power? I'm his wife, Caroline. I have rights too. And I have something you don't have. What's that? She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to me. Go ahead. Read it. I opened it. Inside was a letter typed on official-looking letterhead from a psychiatrist I'd never heard of. It stated that I, Caroline Roberts, had been evaluated and found to be suffering from severe paranoid delusions and was deemed a danger to myself and others. It was signed and dated. I stared at it, my hands shaking. This is fake. Sandra shrugged. Is it? Dr. Pelletier is very respected. If you try to interfere with Robert's care, I'll show this to the judge. I'll tell them you're unstable. I'll tell them you've been harassing us, making wild accusations. Who do you think they'll believe? His loving wife or his paranoid daughter? I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. This can't be real. She leaned in close. Back off, Caroline. Let me take care of him. You'll only make things worse. Then she walked back into the room, kissed Dad on the forehead and left. I stood there in the hallway trembling. I looked at the letter again. It was convincing. Professional. If I didn't know it was a lie, I might believe it myself. But I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. I went to my lawyer immediately. I showed her the letter. She read it carefully, then looked up at me. This is fraudulent. We can prove that. How? We subpoena the psychiatrist. We get your medical records. We expose the lie. But Caroline, this is going to get ugly. He's playing dirty. I don't care. I'm not letting her win. Over the next few weeks, it became a war. Sandra filed a petition to have my power of attorney invalidated, claiming I was mentally unfit. I filed for emergency guardianship. We went to court. The courtroom was small, stuffy. Sandra sat on one side with her lawyer, looking calm and composed. I sat on the other with mine, my hands clenched in my lap. The judge listened to both sides. Sandra's lawyer presented the forged letter, argued that I was a threat to my father's well-being. My lawyer presented the power of attorney, argued that Sandra had isolated and manipulated my father, possibly for financial gain. The judge ordered an independent evaluation of both me and my father. He also ordered a temporary freeze on Dad's financial accounts until the matter was resolved. Sandra's face went white. That was the first crack in her armor. The evaluation took 2 weeks. A court-appointed psychologist interviewed me for hours. I told her everything. About Sandra, about Dad, about the lies. She listened without judgment. Then she evaluated Dad. She spent time with him at the nursing home, asked him questions, assessed his cognitive function. When the results came back, they were clear. I was mentally sound. Dad had mild cognitive decline consistent with his age, but no dementia, no aggression, no signs of the behavior Sandra had claimed. The psychologist recommended he be removed from the nursing home and placed in a less restrictive environment, possibly with family. The judge ruled in my favor. My power of attorney stood. Sandra's petition was denied. And then came the part that made her crumble. The judge ordered a forensic audit of Dad's finances. It turned out Sandra had been draining his accounts for months. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. She'd opened credit cards in his name, taken out a home equity loan. She'd stolen over $200,000. He was arrested. Fraud. Forgery. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. I moved Dad out of Sunrise Meadows and into a small assisted living apartment near my house. It was bright, clean, safe. I visited him every day. Slowly he started to come back to himself. The fog lifted a little. He smiled more. He remembered things. One afternoon we were sitting on his little patio watching the birds. He turned to me and said, "I'm sorry, Caroline." "For what, Dad?" "For not listening to you. For letting her come between us. I should have known better." I took his hand. "You loved her. You trusted her. That's not a bad thing." He shook his head. "I was a fool." "No. You were human." We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "You saved me. You know that, right?" I felt tears slip down my cheeks. "You saved me first, Dad. A long time ago." He squeezed my hand. Sandra pleaded guilty. She got 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution. I doubt we'll ever see that money, but I don't care. It was never about the money. Dad lived for 2 more years after that. Good years. Quiet years. We had Sunday dinners again, just the 2 of us. We watched old movies. We talked about Mom. We laughed. When he passed, it was peaceful. I was holding his hand. He looked at me and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. For everything." And then he was gone. I think about Sandra sometimes. I don't hate her. I probably should, but I don't. I think she was broken in some way I'll never understand. I think she saw my father as a means to an end, and when that didn't work out, she tried to destroy him rather than let him go. But here's what I learned. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up, day after day, even when it's hard. Sometimes it's a piece of paper you signed years ago, tucked in a drawer, waiting for the moment you need it. I kept my promise to my father. I protected him. And in the end, that power of attorney, that simple legal document, was the shield that saved him from someone who pretended to love him but only wanted to use him. If there's a lesson in all this, it's this. Trust your instincts. Something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions. Don't be afraid to protect the people you love, even if it means going to war. And most importantly, don't wait. Don't assume you'll have time later. Set up those legal protections now. Have those conversations now. Because when the storm comes, and it will come, you'll need something to hold on to. I still have that power of attorney. It's in a frame on my wall now, next to a picture of Dad and me from my college graduation. We're both smiling, his arm around my shoulders. I look at it every day. It reminds me that love, real love, fights back. Even when it's quiet. Even when it's just a signature on a page.